There's nothing quite as dread-inducing as playing through your action-adventure game and running into a room where you have to complete a puzzle. And no matter how good this game may be, the use of puzzles always gives the impression that the game is trying to waste your time or get in the way of the more exciting and eventful moments. Whether it be God of War, Uncharted, Assassin's Creed, or Batman Arkham, most large AAA action-adventure games feature at least a few puzzles throughout its runtime, and they are almost always viewed with a sense of distaste. But why? In a lot of ways, our mind is actually designed to enjoy the concept of a puzzle, an answer or reason hiding behind a solution that is left for you to discover. There's a reason why people spend time and money on escape rooms, mystery novels, and true crime documentaries. We love a good mystery. Except when it comes to video games, at least AAA action-adventure games. There are plenty of video games out there that have excellent puzzles and have figured out a way to incorporate puzzles into the design of the game without them feeling like a distraction or roadblock. So, in today's video, we are going to be going over what makes puzzles feel like a nuisance at times, some good and bad examples of puzzle design in video games, and how video games can use puzzles to their advantage in a variety of ways when incorporated correctly. So, why are puzzles viewed in this way? Firstly, let's look at the philosophy behind the implementation of these puzzles from the developer's perspective. The reason why game developers add puzzles into their games is to break up the pace between the more intense, action-packed moments. In any game or story, this is necessary. You cannot have a story that is full of action-packed moments, as this would result in those individual moments losing their impact and meaning. As great as the final boss of God of War is, that moment wouldn't be as great if the puzzles were replaced with other boss fights of similar grandiosity. This creates the situation where puzzles are viewed as a necessary evil by the developers of a game, something that is needed to break up the pace. And it is this word that is most important: needed. When something is viewed as a necessity, there comes a sense of reluctance and resentment for its implementation. They aren't seen as an aspect of a game that will improve on the game. Funnily enough, this means that puzzles in games are sometimes quote-unquote boring on purpose, because in order to have a pace-breaking activity, it must not be as fun as the more grand moments of the game, right? I would be inclined to disagree. However, there is sense to this point of view. Waiting in line at the amusement park is also boring, but it does somewhat make the eventual experience of going on the ride more meaningful, as you had to earn that ride, just as you have to earn the fun, loud, and action-packed moments of a game by getting through the boring parts. So now we know why developers implement these puzzles the way they do, but let's look at just how they make these puzzles boring. In order to understand why the majority of puzzles in video games are boring, we need to understand what exactly makes a puzzle fun. For this video, I have found 3 criteria that are needed to make a puzzle worthwhile and entertaining in a story-based setting. Firstly, any good puzzle needs to have a worthwhile reward. Looking for the key to a lost treasure chest is fun because of the enriching promise that the chest provides. Secondly, the puzzle needs to have an engaging solution and well-orchestrated thought process behind solving it. If the key to a treasure chest is locked behind some levers that you need to pull in a specific order that is laid out in front of you, then that isn't a test of your knowledge, but rather your patience and application. However, if the key is locked behind a series of labyrinthine puzzles that tests your knowledge of the game's mechanics and how to combine them in an interesting way, now the thought process behind the puzzle becomes a lot more fun. And lastly, every puzzle must have a greater purpose or reason for solving it. If the reason for wanting to open the treasure chest is simply to become wealthy, then you have a motivation that makes sense yet is incredibly shallow and unengaging within the context of a story. However, if you need to unlock the chest because the contents of it can save the life of a loved one, for instance, now the motivation is still reasonable, yet is a lot more engaging for the audience. The need for an intriguing reward works because it plays on our curiosity and incentive for a reward, which are fundamentals for how we as humans function. We are naturally curious species, and therefore, when we are presented with a locked door, we want to know what is on the other side. And if we already know what is on the other side in the case of the treasure chest, the promise of a reward is enough to incentivize the completion of the puzzle. The need for an engaging solution and thought process is important because a solution that tests your knowledge fulfills a satisfaction upon completion. It makes you feel smart, so to speak, whereas a solution that tests your patience only makes you feel relief upon completion rather than satisfaction. And the greater purpose to solving this puzzle is especially important in the setting of a story. A wealthy or selfish reward for completing a puzzle might be enough for you to complete it in real life, but in the context of a story or video game, it means almost nothing. Nathan Drake cannot share his treasure with the audience, and so the audience needs another reason to care for why Nathan Drake wants to find the treasure. In the case of Uncharted 4, he needs the money to pay off a debt that could get his brother killed. And since the game has established Nathan and Sam as likable characters, the audience could get behind his search for treasure because of this greater purpose to finding it. So, we have 3 criteria for what makes a puzzle good. Now, let's look at an example of a game with bad puzzles and see why they don't fit this criteria. When I think of a game with bad puzzles, one of the first that comes to mind is Assassin's Creed Valhalla. Valhalla is a game that I have spoken about on this channel, and yet the puzzles were never really a focus of my critique for that game. Yet, I do genuinely think that Assassin's Creed Valhalla has some of the worst puzzles in any video game that I have played. In fact, they are so bad that it is difficult to even consider them puzzles. Let me show you what the average puzzle in Valhalla looks like. There is a chest behind a locked door. Seems Valhalla liked my metaphor. And in order to get past this door, you must open it. Typically, by looking for a small window or opening to fire an arrow through and break the lock. Then you go inside and loot the chest. That is it. That is as far as it goes. Sometimes there may be an extra step involved where you have to break some boxes to reveal that opening. Sometimes there might be a flaming jar that you have to throw at a damaged wall. But at its core, this is the one puzzle that Assassin's Creed Valhalla has to offer you. And this almost identical puzzle is repeated over and over and over again. Now let's refer back to my 3 criteria. An intriguing answer or reward? Nope. Inside every one of these chests is some useless piece of gear or materials, nothing even worth the 20 seconds it took for you to solve the puzzle. An engaging solution? Absolutely not. Not only is it boring to shoot a lock on a door 50 times, but the time it takes for you to figure out the solution to the puzzle is much faster than it actually takes to solve the puzzle. Within 5 seconds of reaching that barred door, you already know the answer to the puzzle, and then you proceed to spend the next 30 seconds to a minute actually performing the solution. There is no questioning or deduction involved, which is funny because questioning and deduction, aka using your brain, is literally the primary goal of a puzzle, which is why I find it hard to even call this a puzzle. I haven't even mentioned the use of eagle vision. In most AAA games, you are likely to see some sort of ping the environment mechanic, where you can all of a sudden see every interactable and important item in the environment. Valhalla used this mechanic, yet instead of it pointing you in the general direction like it might do in The Witcher 3 or Batman Arkham, it will at times reveal to you exactly where the location of a key to a locked chest or door might be. This further eliminates any potential of the player using their knowledge and deduction to solve the puzzle, as there is effectively a button that will solve the puzzle for you. And in terms of there being a greater purpose, there really isn't one either. Eivor opens these chests because of the gear and the loot inside, and you follow along because you hope that inside of these chests will be a cool piece of armor or weapon that you can use. Yet it is almost always something that you will forget about in a few minutes, and there certainly isn't a greater narrative purpose to Eivor seeking out these chests. Even a game like Batman Arkham that has similar puzzles that are extremely repetitive and boring to complete, at the very least there is a greater narrative purpose to completing all of the Riddler puzzles, because doing so will lead Batman to the Riddler, allowing for him to be imprisoned. What makes these puzzles even worse is the sheer amount of them. There must be at least 100 of these near identical puzzles scattered across the map. Had these puzzles followed any of the 3 criteria, or at the very least showed some restraint in terms of the quantity of them, they might have been considered passable. But they simply aren't, and are some of the worst puzzles I have ever seen in a AAA game like this. But as bad as the puzzles in Valhalla are, a lot of the faults made by Valhalla can be seen in other AAA games. Look around at most of the puzzles in AAA games, and I'm sure that you will find that a lot of them are missing at least one of the three criteria. God of War Ragnarok, for instance. Yes, the puzzles might have a greater purpose to them, but the reward for solving these puzzles is almost non-existent, as the use of puzzles in God of War is to act as a roadblock between you and progressing through the story. And the solution process, while sometimes decent, is often ruined by characters explaining the solution to you if you haven't figured it out after the first 45 seconds. Or what about a game like The Last of Us? Again, the greater purpose is there, but the solution process for a lot of the puzzles are the same, typically involving a ladder or dumpster you must move to the correct place. And the reward is, again, the game allowing you to progress with the story rather than an actual helpful item or interesting piece of knowledge. Allow me to contrast this with a game that has some of the greatest puzzles the industry has to offer, Outer Wilds. If you've played Outer Wilds, then you know that this game is a once-in-a-lifetime experience and is best played when you know absolutely nothing about it. So I will do my absolute best to avoid giving anything away about this game while still discussing why the puzzles work so well. However, if you plan on playing Outer Wilds, which you absolutely should, it's one of the greatest games ever made, and you would like to skip through this segment, then refer to the chapters down below. Outer Wilds is a space exploration game that has a strong emphasis on discovery and puzzle solving. And while Outer Wilds is filled with many different puzzles to solve, each of them serve to provide you with knowledge to solve an even greater mystery which the game revolves around. Instantly, this tells us that Outer Wilds fulfills at least one of the three criteria, the greater purpose to solving these puzzles. Again, I will not tell you what this greater purpose is, but there is a large mystery at the center of this universe, and it is relevant in every puzzle that you solve in this game. In terms of the solution process, for one, Outer Wilds has no unlocks or upgrades. You start the game with every tool necessary to finish the game, and the only thing stopping you from doing so is your knowledge of the world around you. Therefore, these puzzles always rely on the use of various tools and your understanding of the world. Some puzzles will simply feel impossible, and that is because you lack a crucial piece of knowledge hidden somewhere else in the world. And once you find that piece of knowledge, you are hit with this aha moment where you immediately make the connection and return to that once seemingly impossible puzzle, yet now possessing the knowledge to solve it, bringing you one step closer to solving the mystery. And in terms of an engaging solution, each puzzle plays on your curiosity to the utmost extent, mainly due to the fact that, like I said, it relies on your knowledge of the world, which begins to make you crave those aha moments once you start to experience the first few. And without saying what the mystery behind the world is, let's just say you'll be dying to figure it out. Overall, Outer Wilds easily has some of the greatest puzzles I have ever had the pleasure of solving, and they easily fulfill my three criteria. Now, when comparing this to Valhalla, it is clear why that game does not have puzzles that are anywhere near the level of Outer Wilds. Firstly, the puzzles of Outer Wilds are actually puzzling and can take you multiple attempts to solve, sometimes being almost impossible to solve without the right knowledge. Whereas in Valhalla, these puzzles do not play on your curiosity or knowledge of the world. You have already solved the puzzle in your head before you even begin the solution process in-game, which is not engaging in the slightest. And unlike Outer Wilds, which has a great narrative purpose for solving these puzzles, Valhalla is only interested in rewarding you with useless materials and boring gear. The abundance and repetition of puzzles in Valhalla also wear out their welcome. The first 5 to 10 of these door-opening puzzles would have been tolerable, but the fact that these exact same puzzles are repeated dozens of times throughout the game had me resenting their inclusion towards the end. Whereas in Outer Wilds, the puzzles never overstay their welcome, and more importantly, no two puzzles are the same. Outer Wilds always leaves you wondering what you might discover next, whereas Valhalla will only leave you wondering if your next discovery will be worthwhile at all. And unfortunately, Valhalla isn't alone in this instance. Many AAA video games fall into the same scenario where each puzzle does not bring about excitement and will only leave you questioning if it is worth completing. But how did we get here? Why is every new AAA game interested in shoving a ton of puzzles into their game simply for the purpose of acting as pace breakers? rather than taking the time to properly curate interesting puzzles that add to the experience. Well, quite frankly, there aren't many attainable alternatives. Would God of War be a better game if it replaced its mediocre puzzles with Kratos walking around aimlessly with no combat or story moments? Would The Last of Us be any better if every ladder or dumpster puzzle was replaced with an empty corridor? And how empty would the world of Assassin's Creed Valhalla or Batman Arkham feel if it got rid of every Riddler puzzle or locked door? I'm not saying there aren't any solutions. Games like Outer Wilds or Portal prove that it is very much possible to feature excellent puzzle design in gaming. Yet, as the gaming industry grows and the scope of these massive releases grows with it, it is hard to think of many reasons as to why developers should hold a greater emphasis on strong puzzle design. We live in a time where video games take longer and longer to make than they used to. God of War 2018 spent about 5 years in development, Red Dead Redemption 2 about 8 years, and hell, it took 10 years since the last GTA game to even get a trailer for the new one, and it's been 6 years since the Elder Scrolls 6 trailer, and we still don't know anything about that game. The point is, game development is a long and arduous process, and when the current market is so much more interested in a strong combat system, well-written narrative, and beautiful worlds to explore, it leaves little room, little time, and little desire for developers to focus on puzzle design in their video games. The perfect video game does not exist, and due to these long and harsh development schedules, more often than not, something has to give in order for the game to be released on time and in a polished state. And unfortunately, it is often great puzzle design that is abandoned in the name of this release schedule. I am not saying that these AAA games are bad because they lack a good puzzle design. God of War and The Last of Us are some of my favorite games, and yet I understand that without this sacrifice, they likely would not have turned out as good as they have, or at the very least, would have taken a few more years in the oven until they reach an acceptable state. Still, when playing games like Outer Wilds, I can't help but wonder how many more amazing puzzle games we might have gotten if major gaming developers had continued to include great puzzles in their games, and how different the gaming industry would view the inclusion of these puzzles. Until the next Outer Wilds comes along, I guess I will have to continue wondering.